Welcome to this Airwalk Reply podcast, The Big Questions in Tech, with your host Alex Hammond and Delivery and Change Consulting leads Tom Hayes and Steve Isbell. Together they answer the big questions for modern tech functions.
Hi and welcome to The Big Questions in Tech with Airwalk Reply. I'm Alex Hammond, your host, and today we're going to be covering off the big questions around a modern technology function. Joining me today, Tom Hayes and Steve Isbell of Airwalk. Hi guys, welcome.
Hey.
Hi.
Lots of energy, love it.
Hello. Yeah, so I guess probably a brief introduction. So Tom Hayes, been with Airwalk for a couple of years. And prior to that, spent quite a lot of time in technology operations, resilience, service management, and generally working with some of the big problems in public sector and financial services. So hopefully can bring a bit of insight.
Thanks, Tom.
Actually, fairly similar. So been with Isbell a couple of years. Prior to that, predominantly in sort of delivery, program management, transformation, tech transformation. So yeah, predominantly in financial services as well.
So the topic today, I think what we're really trying to tackle, and I think it's fair to say we're quite passionate about it because I think it's something that we see organisations grapple with a lot, is that there seems to have been a huge onus and in a lot of cases investment in terms of the technology itself, the underlying technology. It's a lot of chat about cloud migration. At the moment, it's a lot of chat about AI. There's all sorts of different components. And I think what we're seeing is that the same level of focus and investment and transformation hasn't necessarily been enacted on the functions themselves. So the technology functions, whether that's CIO function, CTO, technology, whatever an organization calls it, their ability to do their job, their ability to service their customers, generally speaking, the internal customers within an organization, that hasn't changed vastly, is our kind of hypothesis, I guess, and our view of the world, and we think that that's the key to unlocking a lot of the value of the technology. So that's kind of the topic that we're tackling really today, isn't it? And I think it's so fundamental to realizing the value of some of these underlying technology investments, isn't it? If you don't do that, you've got a load of shiny new tin and maybe not moving the needle a huge amount else.
Absolutely. I think probably the elephant sort of word in the room is agile, right? And I think that there's sometimes some negative connotations that come with the word agile. It sort of insinuates a bit of reactiveness and responding quickly to change, whereas actually you want to be ahead of it, not just reacting to it. I think trying to get ahead of the curve rather than being behind the curve is really important, and I think that's one of the challenges, is that you're trying to retrofit that mindset into organizations and teams that are used to maintaining an operation, for example, when actually you want people innovating, transforming, moving things forward. So I think that's one of the big things. It's something we see, and trying to make that fundamental shift away from reacting to actually empowering people to go out there and do things proactively, make things happen proactively, and ultimately, like I say, get ahead of the curve rather than just respond.
So if you take a given enterprise technology function, they're kind of bombarded with new technologies, all sorts of kind of demands from the business, from customers, also. What are the big challenges for a CIO, CTO to transform their function?
Tom just touched on it there. I think pace is definitely a significant challenge. So being able to, as a team, being able to come together and deliver, whether it be for your internal customer or an external customer, but being able to deliver quickly. And I think the pace has changed significantly over time in terms of the demand now is just so much greater for the next thing as quickly as you can deliver it. So pace is definitely one of the key challenges, and how do teams collaborate together quickly and then deliver quickly at pace. And there's quite a few elements, I think, to that.
It's fair to say that's one of the biggest gripes, isn't it? When we speak to organisations, either we're speaking to the CIO and we're saying, right, what are you being moaned about? What's keeping you up at night? What are you getting hammered by your boss about? But if you speak to business users, is what's the biggest gripe? And it's that IT's too slow. IT's too slow. It takes too long to deliver things. There's a cost element to that probably as well, which you can come on to. But it's definitely something that we hear significantly and consistently. Things just do not move quickly enough. And as you said, the world is different now. In the kind of 80s, 90s, noughties, broadly speaking, the pace at which you needed to release things was very different.
Yeah.
We're in a different world now, and that's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it?
And it's also then it's all you generally don't associate things like control with speed, and in a lot of environments where there's still pressure to do things right and keep those 5 nines of uptime and all of those sorts of things, but you're then being pushed. It's almost like sort of juxtaposed a little bit to say do things quicker, but do them just as secure and stable as you have done to date.
But control can really help you though, because with control you can, if you look to how do you optimize and automate what you're doing to go faster, safer, then actually having a really controlled way of working, a very repeatable way of working, can definitely make a big difference. That you mentioned Agile earlier. That's one of the things that Agile, one of the great things about Agile is about that repeatability, the reflection of how you're working and adapting as you go. But if you can add the control element to that, which is we want a repeatable process, we want to automate that process as much as we can, then you can then start to really react far quicker.
What's your view on the notion that Agile with a capital A, I guess, rather than a small a, because everybody should be trying to achieve Agile with a small a, but Agile with a large A is only relevant in certain types of delivery or certain types of context. Do you agree with that?
It's challenging. I think it can be. I think it particularly, I'd say it traditionally wouldn't fit so much with raw infrastructure delivery. And we've had a challenge previously where we were being pressed to sort of adopt a more iterative way of delivering infrastructure refresh predominantly, and you go, well, it sort of seems again slightly at odds with what we're trying to do in terms of maintaining uptime and core resilience and that sort of thing. But actually, when you start to break it down and you start to look at, we're not saying do things in a less stable or controlled way, as you said, Steve. It's more about how do you break this down in a way that can be delivered quicker with the support of your suppliers, your partners, to make things happen quicker. We're not waiting on, there's no waste. We're not waiting. We're not constantly reworking. It's those kind of things that mean that you can continue to deliver infrastructure refresh, for example, at pace, but you're not thinking about it as an annual budget setting cycle where you're asking for, can I have X million pounds this year to go and upgrade this? And if you don't get granted it, then suddenly you're building up a legacy or a currency issue. So it's more about thinking about how do I break the work down and flatten the curve over a period of time. So I think it can work in those kinds of instances. Not just kind of software development, I guess. Yeah.
It's kind of, and I think this probably goes beyond the definition of Agile at least, but it's having a set of principles in terms of how you're operating, and we'll cover this off in probably the subsequent part of this podcast. But part of moving the needle is having a slightly different mindset, I think, isn't it, in technology, being much more outcome focused, maybe thinking about products rather than projects and kind of just pure delivery. It's an area that we see kind of much more compelling results, I think, isn't it?
Technology definitely helps teams now as well. So if you look at, just quickly going back to your question about infrastructure, or does it apply to all teams? I mean, historically, you'd say infrastructure and platform would be more challenging in a more of an iterative delivery environment. But actually now with cloud being extensively used in these environments, you can absolutely, through the use of infrastructure as code and various cloud native services, can very much deliver very iteratively. And therefore you're not procuring hardware and then provisioning that hardware. You're going to the cloud, you're going to the marketplace, and you're picking up the tools that you need to deliver the service you need. And therefore, you can definitely apply the agile way of working, regardless whether you're doing platform engineering, software engineering, data engineering. It cuts across.
So we talked about pace being a big challenge, operating at pace. What are the other challenges that we're seeing amongst our kind of CIO community?
One of the things that I've seen is that technology are trying to transform and trying to change and deliver at pace, and perhaps other areas of the organisation aren't on the same path. So they're kind of where technology are trying to push forward. There are potentially other areas, people, the ability to attract talent in the right way, to give the kind of working conditions that talent in tech want. There's also the elements of being able to procure services and work with partners and suppliers in a way that fits that kind of quicker paced model, getting away from the 5 to 7 year fixed contracts and moving away from that kind of model. So I think one of the big things is kind of offsetting that mentality of the rest of the organisation and starting to actually align it all to, we need all of this to come together to start delivering.
So what we're saying, that part of the challenge is that if you're just looking at technology in isolation, you're gonna start butting up against some real challenges. So it's trying to have a slightly more holistic approach to how you tackle these things.
We often talk about technology function being an enabler
Yeah.
for the business. But actually many businesses now, technology is such a core component. It's not just an enabler, it's like a core part of the organisation. And the other core parts of the organisation have to work seamlessly with technology. So if you're heading up a technology function nowadays, it's how do I help my team work best with all the other component parts of the business, so we're all moving forward as one. So that kind of shared outcome piece you talked to as well just a few minutes ago is critical to that. How does the tech function work with all of the other different functions of the business on the same shared outcome, and delivering for that? So,
and it is challenging, right? I mean, on a day-to-day level, that involves fundamentally changing the way that you get your function to interface with the rest of your organisation and your customers, and trying to shift what is, as you said earlier, might have been a bit more of a back office function, and actually trying to move that closer to the demand and closer to the customer, so that you're doing what adds value rather than what's kind of a maintenance or a kind of back office type function. I think is really challenging to do, and that can only happen if you've got the buy-in and the support to be able to do that with the rest of the organisation, not just within your technology function.
The technology team being far closer to the customer really aids that delivery as well. It drives innovation. It drives value far quicker often because they really understand. The techies really understand what the problems are the business is trying to solve. Instead of it being translated to them, they can be there and they can help really understand those requirements, and then how do they best fulfill those requirements with technology. So therefore, I think you naturally get more agility, more speed in your delivery, because you're just far closer to the customer. You can understand more, then you can look to iteratively deliver that value.
But that feels like a big challenge, right? So at the moment, that whole engagement model, way of working, as you say, much more cross-functional execution and understanding of what the business is trying to do, that isn't generally fundamentally there in a lot of functions that we see, is it?
It doesn't come natural to organisations often.
No.
Business users working far closer with a technical team and vice versa, that isn't commonplace, even though we've been talking about it in the industry for a long time, but certainly in large organisations that is far more challenging. Organisations set themselves up, the larger they get, the more siloed they tend to get, and people are not collaborating on a day-to-day basis. So therefore you've got to break down those barriers and get teams to work much closer together, be more cross-functional, but that cross-functional element needs to be not just a technology team, but having other elements of the organisation involved with those delivery teams, so they're working collaboratively together. So another challenge is probably how you attract and retain and develop the talent you have within tech. We know we've been talking very recently about how challenging the marketplace is at the moment, to attract the right people, even a small number of the right people for your organisation that meet your skill requirements, that meet the behaviours you're looking for the leadership qualities that you're looking for. It's a challenging market right now to do that. So I think being able for organisations to be able to attract the right talent in the first place, have that talent then working well together and then retaining it and helping it to continue to develop. Tom mentioned just a little bit earlier about the environment that technical people want to work within. So how do you put the right environment around people, the right training and development around people, invest in people, and work in a way that people want to work in a kind of a modern team setup.
I think it comes back to the thing about having a coordinated plan as an organisation in terms of how you want to operate. Sort of understanding that for different functions, for different roles, for different jobs, the nature of how people work is different. And as you said, Steve, that for a lot of sort of developers and software engineers, actually being in a comfortable space or being remote in a lot of cases and having that flexibility to work and do their best work when they are best suited to do their work is often in my experience is the better fit for that sort of role profile. So when you start to see things like mandating development teams back in offices 5 days a week, you start to think actually you're probably going to put a lot of people off, and that talent will ultimately find the conditions that they want to work in. So I think it's about having that coordinated response, as you say, and understanding that there isn't a one size fits all. And actually, yes, having people in and working together is really important for collaboration and problem solving and those sorts of things. But actually, there's a balance to all of it, and it's finding and striking that right balance.
I think the partnerships you have as well with third-party expertise is really important. Organisations shouldn't be trying to solve all the problems themselves. Trying to have all of that talent and having people, the more cross-functional you become as well, you need those specialist skills still. So you can draw on that specialist skills from outside your organisation. Find a strategic partner to work with, or a couple of partners to work with, and then pull that specialist skills when you need it, instead of trying to grow it all in-house and keeping it all in-house. So I think there's a blend of your internal team, but then using the expert skills when you need to.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of beyond suppliers and as well into geographies. A lot of the time, skills are brought in offshore, and how do you, again, we talked a bit about getting closer to the customer and the customer demand. But there's a balance to be struck there in terms of getting close to the customer, understanding the customer need. But if the customer is on a different continent, how do you manage that, and how do you put the right layers of organisational control and those kind of interlocks in place to make sure that you're translating the requirements properly and you're mapping out the customer requirements properly and translating that into your offshore development teams? I think there's a balance with all of that to be struck.
So we've touched there on some of the kind of the more strategic challenges for CIOs, the sheer pace of change that they have to cope with, the pace of change of technology and staying on top of that, the skills that you need, and kind of how you bring your traditional workforce on that journey. It's a whole host of things that they're grappling with. This is a bit of a lofty question, really, but what does good look like? And there's obviously a few different answers to this question, but what are the real kind of themes that we're seeing and that we're helping clients to kind of adopt when it comes to a really kind of robust, modern technology function?
The thing that I've sort of observed in a few different organisations is that a lot of the fundamentals in terms of the organisational structure might be in place, or they might be in flight in terms of that transition to sort of a more modern, customer aligned, adopting value streams and aligning to customer value, all that good stuff. Product management functions in place, aligning things into products. They're all good things, but actually taking that and making it real for your development teams and your engineering teams who are doing the work, there's often I kind of seen a missing link, and that the almost hand-holding people and giving people the time and the capacity to adopt that change and change their mindset alongside maintaining their output and delivering what they need to be delivering. I think that's one of the really tricky things, and I think enabling and empowering people to have that time to adopt and align themselves to those kind of new ways of thinking, new methodologies is one of the things that has to be done, and it's not always seen that way. It's seen as another thing on top of your day job. You expect your engineering capability to just start working in a different way, when actually there's a lot of time and effort that needs to go into coaching and developing those people to understand that new way of working, I suppose.
We talk a lot about being product led instead of being project led. Let's
bring that to life. What does that
explore
mean?
That. So project led, historically has been bring people together that you need to deliver a particular output. Whereas product led is all about bringing a team together, keeping them together, and working towards an outcome that you want to deliver. And how do you develop a product or a service? And then how do you maintain and run and manage that service? And then the team stays together and does all of those component parts. So they're taking an idea all the way through to implementation to live. But when it goes live, they're then looking after it as well. And then they're starting again, if you like, to develop the next idea. But by bringing those people together, you often get a lot of good synergy, because the same people are working together repeatedly. You're learning what good looks like in terms of your internal team. You're reflecting after you've done a piece of work, got it into live, you're then reflecting on kind of what worked, what didn't work, how do we adjust, how do we change, but the people stay together, you don't break them up again like you would in a traditional project.
Yep.
You're also not having any handoffs. So we talk about what does good look like. We talked about the need for fast delivery, not having handoffs to other teams, being able to do it all yourself within your team, and if you identify a role that you don't have, bringing that person in to the team so they're part of that team is important, because then you cut down on the dependencies with other teams or the handoffs with other teams, which again is often a challenge within more of a project-based role where you're handing a small team does something and hands it to the next team, hands it to the next team. So you keep all that together. I think that brings it to life a bit in terms of that product. Having a product focus, keeping your team together, iterating what you do to achieve the value or the outcome you're looking to do, but then actually looking after what you've developed and delivered is a key part of that. Instead of handing it to a separate operations team or a separate support team, you're looking after it yourself. So I
think another thing that I've sort of noticed or picked up when we've got it right in organisations that I've worked in is it's a big one. We've got the funding model right to go with the technology delivery, so and the operations. So rather than the sort of annual bum fight for project funding and looking to sort of sometimes you're overestimating, you might be doing a bit of crystal ball gazing to try and understand what you're going to be doing in 12 months time, 18 months time, and having to commit to that work a long way ahead. Actually, where we've got it right was we started looking at what is our enduring funding to not just develop but run this as a product, and therefore you start to again flatten that curve, and it gives you the ability within the team to pick the most valuable activities closer to the time. So you're not doing that second guessing as to what a customer might want in 12-18 months. You're actually being able to respond to customer demand because you've got the ability to flex within your funding source. So I think that's been a big one for me in terms of getting it right.
How big a thing do you think it is shifting the mindset a little bit to making the connection that actually the technology function is a strategic function now? It's not an internal supplier. It's not something that should be sitting in the background. It's front and center. But with that comes the responsibility to make sure that the way that the function is lined up, the things that they're working on, the way the funding's structured is genuinely strategic. Kind of my observation would be that we're still working on that. There's still a maturity curve to go on there. But in terms of what good looks like, it feels like a CIO that has a strategy, a genuine strategy for their function, that is fully aligned with the business and their strategy and their outcomes, and is doing everything it can to fulfill those. That feels quite fundamental to me. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, it feels like it should be one of the same thing, well, very, very close to one of the same thing, which is that the technology strategy or the technology vision or the mission of technology is very closely aligned to the vision and mission of the business, and the outcomes the business are achieving are the same outcomes that technology are just helping to enable those or helping to contribute towards delivery of those. And the closer that I think they should be one of the same. The business teams and the technology teams should be working towards that same goal. They should be measured in the same way. That what does success look like for that team should be. It's not what does success look like for technology or what does success look like for the business. They should just be what's the outcome we're collectively working towards.
So I think what that drives is it drives the business case, it drives the prioritization, it drives kind of the value creation of projects. Often what's leveled at IT organizations and functions is, okay, what are we getting for our money? It's vastly expensive, and to an extent, that function is always going to have to keep the lights on for legacy technology. But in terms of how you prioritize, in terms of demonstrating that value, if that's coming from the strategy, say, right, well, what are we doing next? What are we doing first? What's the most important things? Well, if you're pointing back at the business strategy, that's all much more straightforward, isn't it? If you haven't got that, it's incredibly difficult to really be justifying the big ticket spend. And I think what we see in those sorts of environments is a difficulty in spending strategically on technology, I think, right? Those long-term bets, for want of a better descriptor, but placing strategic investment in particular platforms, or maybe a migration to cloud, or maybe kind of investing in it, whatever it might be, they are made infinitely easier if it's being driven by the business strategy, right?
Yeah, and the business outcome you're trying to achieve is you can align directly to that.
Yeah.
And there's technology's got a part to play there in terms of keeping the run costs low. When you're building something to go live to achieve an outcome, you've really got to think about the supportability of that. What does the run look like? What does the longevity of that look like? How automated can that be? How much monitoring and hand-holding does that need? Or can it be set up in a way that means it looks after itself? The team's notified if there's any problems it needs to face into, and it does that. But teams should be striving to how do they keep their run costs very, very low? How do they spend the majority of their time on new business development, or changing the product or changing the service to achieve the next valuable item? Not keeping the lights on, not looking after it. So how do you drive your processes? How do you continually review the amount of time you're spending looking after what you've built and keeping the lights on? And how do you look to optimize it, reduce it, automate it? That's a key part of it. And then there's not so much of an argument of the IT function is costing us a lot of money. It's actually we're very lean in terms of the way we run it, and we're spending we're investing the vast majority of our team's time on building, developing and building new ideas.
Thanks, guys. That's all we've got time for today. Join us next time where in part 2, where we're going to talk about how you transition to that kind of panacea of a modern technology function. Look forward to seeing you then.
Subscribe now to never miss an episode of The Big Questions in Tech.